I truly think that trading is one of the hardest jobs in the world that you can have. Now, I don't think obviously like it would be harder than a surgeon or, like a heart doctor or like any of those jobs, even the military, because you're risking your life essentially. But it's definitely up there in my opinion, especially as like a retail trader, as one of the hardest jobs you can do. And there's a few reasons why I think. Now, obviously, a lot of people that watch my channel are probably traders or aspiring traders, so you can probably relate firsthand as to why it's so hard and why it's so difficult. But these are my reasons why I think trading is one of the hardest careers and jobs that you could do in the world. So the first point, which I think is kind of the main point, is you can do everything right and still be wrong and lose money. There's very few jobs in the world where you can do everything and more that you're kind of expected to do and not get paid for it or not get paid more for it, right? With trading, you could do all the back testing, you could collect all the data, and you could still have a month where you lose money or where trades don't go your way, just because that's the nature of the market, right? If you think about kind of a traditional job, if you spend a lot of time on something or you work hard towards something, chances are you'll either get rewarded for it financially, or it can kind of help towards a potential promotion down the line. And that's just not the case in trading. You could do everything right and still be wrong. So I think that's kind of the key point as to why I think trading is one of the hardest careers in the world. There's very few where you can do everything right and lose. Now, on top of that, mentally, it is so difficult. And again, I'm not saying there's other jobs that aren't mentally challenging. A lot of jobs, if not all jobs, are stressful. But I think trading exposes you to a whole range of emotions that sometimes you've never dealt with before. Dealing with risk, dealing with losing as frequently as you do in trading, dealing with big wins, dealing with fear of entry, revenge trading, ego, having money floating in profit and being disciplined enough to not take it. There's so much psychology that goes into trading, and you have to spend a lot of time really working on it. With a normal job, it's you have the usual stresses, some industries more than others, but trading, there's just so much to take into account that you just don't really find in other careers. And so you're juggling all these kind of physical sides of it where you're back testing, collecting all this data, but then you're also having to manage your mental side of things, which I think is 80 to 90% of the reason why traders lose and why traders fail. So if you're not nailing that and you're not nailing the data, then you're never going to be able to get there. So the second reason is how emotionally challenging trading is, and how much you have to do to kind of build that and improve on it. Now, kind of off the back of you can be totally right, but still lose money, is it takes years to even see any money from Forex. And what I mean by that is very rarely will you get into Forex and within your first 6 months to even a year make a ton of money. And that might take 5 years, 10 years, who knows? It kind of varies person to person. But my point is there's very few jobs that you could do where when you first start, you don't get paid anything. And in fact, you actually lose money. You don't even stay break even. Money gets taken away from you. And so if you imagine you start a normal job, maybe you're a waiter or you work in retail or you work in sales and marketing, whatever it is, the day you start, the day you get paid, right? Doesn't matter how little you do, how much you do. Doesn't matter if, you don't do anything that day and you do more that day. You just don't, you earn money from the start, right? Whereas with trading, as I said, if anything, you actually lose money in your first, year. So there's very few jobs where that is the case. And I think that's a really difficult thing because no one wants to work for free, right? The whole reason we work is to get paid or for other reasons. So why would you want to put a year into trading, for example, and get nothing for it? So you have to have other drivers other than money, because at the start, money is not going to be a factor in trading. It has to be, the idea of freedom or the goal of wanting to learn a skill for the rest of your life, things like that. And I think one that isn't spoken about a lot or much is you kind of get a lot of judgment. And the reason being is trading is a very frowned upon industry sometimes. I think the Forex industry does have a bad rap. A lot of people don't trust it. They think it's scammy. it's gambling, people lose. So there's a lot of kind of negative connotations around trading. And so when you tell someone if you're either a trader or you want to be a trader, that comes with a lot of judgment because it doesn't seem safe, it doesn't seem secure. Now, obviously, you know that you're not just trading blindly, you're using data that you've tested, but not everyone's going to know that. And so a lot of judgment can be passed down because essentially people, especially older generations, are going to not understand it and just see it as you want to gamble for a living. And they're not really going to think that's an acceptable job to have until you start making a lot of money. And then, you know, once you're making thousands or whatever, you can kind of prove that it is worth it. But for the first year, you're going to have a lot of judgment because you're going to either, as I said, lose money or have nothing to show for it. And so with that judgment comes pressure, comes stress. It doesn't necessarily come from, you know, family members, but it could come from friends. Even if they don't explicitly, you know, judge you for it, you might feel that they're still judging you for it. There's loads of people that could. And so, as I said, with that brings pressure, brings stress, makes you doubt yourself if it's something you want to do. And then that kind of reinforces the difficulty of keeping your psychology in check and making sure that your trading strategy is good. So that's another big one. And I think that people don't talk about that one as much unless you've kind of got thousands to show why, you know, thousands of pounds show that trading does work. If you don't have that, the judgment you get can sometimes be really difficult to deal with. So kind of going back to the points that I was saying, I think ultimately the fact that you can lose money and still do everything right, that's kind of the first one. The second point being the fact that people are going to judge you, and that kind of will add more stress and pressure. The third point being the fact that, and kind of off the back of it, is that you don't start earning on the first day that you start trading. You're going to have to wait 6 months, a year, 2 years sometimes before you actually earn any money. So having your motivations can be really difficult. And on top of that, it is the psychology side of things, and not just psychology, but dealing with emotions that you've probably never had to deal with before. And so you combine all of those together, and I think you get a really difficult job, i.e. trading. And I think that's why most people quit. You know, not everyone's going to be cut out for it. I think you have to be a certain kind of character. You've got to have a certain drive, a certain resilience, a certain discipline. And you'll notice that all of the sort of successful traders do have those traits in them. If you don't have them, I'm not saying that's it, give up. There is still a possibility. You just have to work on it more, as opposed to someone that maybe has it already or has maybe more of it because of, you know, certain reasons. Let me know what you think. Obviously, as I said, I'm not saying that trading is you know, harder than being in the army or being a heart surgeon or, you know, many jobs like that, ambulances, paramedics, police, fire, and, you know, any of those. I'm not saying that, and this is just my opinion, but I think if we're talking kind of corporate world, I think trading has to be considered one of the more harder, or one of the hardest sort of ways you can make your money, especially if, as I said, if you're retail, because at least if you're institutional, you still have a salary. It's just you can kind of make a lot more depending on how well you do, but you still have that salary. When you're a retail trader, you have no, you know, salary, no buffer, unless you're kind of paying yourself a salary. But most people probably aren't when they get into it. But as I said, let me know what you think. I'd be interested to hear your opinion on this topic, but I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.